everyone's style works for everyone. But for me, I need just like bullet points.
Right.
And I wanted to do better. I wanted the framework. I wanted to learn how to write a better book, to organize it and to get it together instead of just, at first, I just had themes floating around. I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so taking that course, I was able to go step by step and start from the beginning instead of just floundering.
Welcome to the Fiction Writing Made Easy podcast. My name is Savannah Gilbo, and I'm here to help you write a story that works. I want to prove to you that writing a novel doesn't have to be overwhelming. So each week, I'll bring you a brand new episode with simple, actionable, and step-by-step strategies that you can implement in your writing right away. So whether you're brand new to writing or more of a seasoned author looking to improve your craft, this podcast is for you. So pick up a pen and let's get started. In today's episode, we're going behind the scenes of one writer's journey to hear how she published not one, but 2 books in the last 6 months. One's a really fun space opera that's the second book in a series, and the other is a romantic comedy. My guest's name is Angela Haas, and she is a small business owner turned author of 3 published books. You'll hear about what it was like to switch from writing science fiction to writing romantic comedy, what happened when Angela had not one but 2 terrible experiences with book editors, one who called her book spoofy and the other who randomly rewrote passages of her story, and how despite how devastating both experiences were, Angela did not give up. Also, Angela shares what made the tricky advice to show, don't tell finally stick, and how she approaches outlining as a diehard pantser, and why she ultimately decided that self-publishing was the right path for her. But before we dive into all of that, I want to read you the back cover copy of the 2 books that we're going to talk about today. So the first is called Seconds to Oblivion, and it's the second book in Angela's Keepers of the Universe series. So this is her sci-fi space opera book, and the back cover says, "In a battle for the galaxy, love and duty collide. To escape the pain of her past, Marlene Mason settles into a mundane life. Work, sleep, repeat. Nothing to challenge her, no decisions to be made. When a harrowing traffic accident awakens powers that shatter her safe place, she is propelled into an adventure, forcing her to confront the ghosts that haunt her, while the vengeful Zuldari commander, Pharaoh, starts playing dangerous games with other people's lives. In war, love is complicated. Commander Callahan Merritt has a mission, and it doesn't include fully surrendering to his feelings for Marlene. For Cal, it's easier to be a soldier than a lover. As Pharaoh's malevolent grip tightens on Marlene and her allies, the line between friend and foe blurs. Cal must learn to put love over duty, and Marlene must trust in her newfound strength to save her homeworld from annihilation. In the second installment of the captivating Keepers of the Universe series, join Marlene on a heart-pounding journey from the depths of alien oceans to the scorching deserts of Nevada. With the fate of the Sentinels and the galaxy hanging in the balance, can Marlene unlock her true power to ensure a future worth fighting for?" Okay, so that is Angela's book called Seconds to Oblivion, and again, it's the second book in her Keepers of the Universe series. It's a space opera sci-fi book, and now we're going to totally shift gears and talk about her romantic comedy. So this one is called My Plus One Equals You, and here's what the back cover says. "They're just trying to survive wedding season until love crashes the party. It's wedding season in Scottsdale, the perfect backdrop for love, unless you're Rachel or Cameron. For Rachel, wedding fever is difficult to escape, especially since she's a 34-year-old perpetual bridesmaid. For Cam, who invests more in his bakery than his heart, weddings are just another event to survive. Desperate to avoid the endless parade of I-dos alone, Rachel and Cam make a pact. Be each other's plus one for the season's weddings. The rules are simple. Don't overcomplicate things, be there for each other, and most importantly, don't fall in love. Easy, right? When their exes reappear, stirring up old emotions, their resolve is tested. Amid the swirl of confetti and wedding vows, they confront their growing feelings and lingering past. Will the irresistible pull of love force them to break the rules? Dive into a steamy, humorous, and heartfelt story where love may be the wedding guest that neither Rachel nor Cameron saw coming. Now, we will of course link to both books in the show notes, but let's go ahead and dive right into my conversation with Angela Haas. Hi, Angela. Welcome to the Fiction Writing Made Easy podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Angela Haas, and I actually started listening to Fiction Writing Made Easy a long time ago. It was one of the very first podcasts I ever listened to when I was just starting out. And I loved it because it was so helpful for me. So it really started to guide me. But previously, I'm actually a small business owner. My husband and I own 8 retail brick and mortars.
Wow.
And I've been doing that for 30 years.
Wow.
And in the business a while ago, I was an art buyer, book buyer, and just merchandiser. So have that experience. And then kind of left that just because it's hard to work with your husband sometimes
No
day
doubt.
to day.
Yeah.
So I went on to get my master's in communication and started teaching college classes, just college public speaking, mass media, and business classes. And then during COVID, thought, hey, I've always been a writer. I've always loved writing since I was a kid. Maybe I'll pull out this thing I started in high school and dust it off and see what I can do with it. And now here we are. So
one of the cool things that came from COVID, right, is you became a published author.
Yes.
But talk about really cool full circle moments. So you were a listener of the podcast. We're going to talk about you came into the Notes to Novel course and then look at all the things you've done since, which is so cool. So I want to rewind you like all the way back to, if you can remember, in COVID times when you pulled out that book from high school and you're like, okay, maybe I'm going to give it another shot. What happened? I'm sure you were like most of us. You went to the internet and you were Googling how to do the various things. But did you make progress with that? Like, just talk me through kind of that first attempt.
Well, it actually was, I almost quit right before I started because we're so connected. We're so much more connected now because there's writer groups with Slack and Discord and we have circles now. Before that, I didn't really have anyone. I was only reading Writer's Digest. I didn't know anything else. And they had a contest in there where if you paid for this course, you could pitch your outline for your book to an agent and they'd give you feedback and maybe take you on. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm just I've always loved my story. It's just about superheroes in space. So I went to the course, pitched the outline, and she ripped it to shreds. And it was hard because it wasn't like I cold called someone. I was following the course instructions and I was thinking you'd get some feedback. And she was like, this sounds spoofy. It's not good. And so I went to Facebook crying in this one writer's group I was in, like, is this normal? Does this happen? And this lady saw my post and said, no, join my group, find Savannah Gilbo's podcast, find these other podcasts and keep going. And so from that, I was like, you know what? I'm determined, but I'm going to take that feedback, even though it hurts so bad. And I'm going to start writing this over from scratch and reading and learning, taking Notes to Novel course and starting to learn how to actually put a novel together. And so out of that, of rising from those ashes of just feeling hurt, it just turned out really well.
Yeah. And it's such a hard experience to go through something like that. I know a lot of writers who have similar stories, and it's unfortunate because I think after kind of seeing all these different writers go through it, that person probably meant well, I would hope, but the way that they're delivering what they're trying to say isn't always the best or the most constructive. And I kind of wish that we all knew how to give feedback in a positive, constructive way and things like that, just so we would never have to hear stories like this because it kills me. It makes me so upset to hear you be like, I almost quit. And now look at you. You're like publishing your 3rd book.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad for that woman in the Facebook group that was like, no, this is not good. This is normal. And also for you, having the tenacity to get back into it.
Yeah. And I think it was hard because it was my first real attempt to put myself out there. I think that's, as authors, we're always like, do I really want people to read this? Because it's so intimate for you. It's like been in your head and now you put it out for people to judge. But it put me through that right away. And so it was easier for me to accept other feedback or criticism because it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. And it's hard because you never know what people are bringing to your feedback. So, sometimes that's the hard part about writers groups or critique groups is maybe someone just had an experience like that. And so they're going to pick on you because they don't know how else to do things.
Exactly.
So it's so hard. Getting feedback is so hard, which is why I always recommend to people, like, if you can afford to hire someone to help you with it, or to, a
Yeah.
developmental editor, even paid beta readers like the Spun Yarn, whoever, that they're trained to give you feedback in that constructive way, it's just so much better. But I know not everyone can do that. So you have to be conscious of who you're asking into your world to read your story and to give you their thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. And you still have to be open to feedback too. I mean, sometimes it does hurt, but sometimes it can open you up to being like, you know what, I can make this so much better. Thank you. Even the bad stuff. I've
And you
gotten
have to
some
kind of know.
1-star reviews that were hard, but
Yes,
I took it and it made me better. So
yeah. And those are hard too, right? It's like, you wish you could know, A, does this person read sci-fi? B, do they like humor in their sci-fi, right? Like, you wish you could know
right.
the context, but unfortunately all we get is that text. And
Mhm.
we all get the 1, 2-star, 3-star reviews, and they all hurt. It is just a part of it. But for me personally, and for the writers I work with, I'm like, every time you read one of those, go read like 3 of your good reviews, because
Yes.
you need to feel those just as much. And they're there too. We just sometimes discount them a little.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We focus on the bad ones and ignore
Yeah.
that. I've had a lot of good reviews too.
Yeah. But okay, so you're a little phoenix rising out of the ashes of that feedback. And so you found this woman and she said, hey, that's not normal. You started listening to the podcast. And then what made you sign up for the Notes to Novel course?
Well, I actually went through StoryGrid and then saw that you're a StoryGrid editor. There's so much that comes at you when you're trying to decide what to sign up for. The reason I took the plunge with the Notes to Novel course is because of your podcast, because the way that you present information is so clear and concise, and it's so organized that it's easy for me to listen, learn. Just your style for me is just so much easier, because sometimes, and there's no criticism, everyone's style works for everyone. But for me, I need just like bullet points.
Right.
And I wanted to do better. I wanted the framework. I wanted to learn how to write a better book, to organize it and to get it together, instead of just, at first, I just had themes floating around. I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so taking that course, I was able to go step by step and start from the beginning instead of just floundering.
Yeah.
So
Which is great. Because you wanted to write more than one book too. I know the sci-fi book was, you always talked about it becoming a series. And then also I knew you had other ideas beyond just that series. So that process is really important. Again, wherever you get your process from, whoever is listening, whatever process you like, whatever makes sense, having that process to come to every time you have an idea is huge.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And so I love that helped. And was there anything, I always like to ask people, was there anything you were worried about before you signed up? Because like you said, there's so many things out there. So if it were me, I might be like, gosh, there's so many things. What if this is just another thing that doesn't work? Or, was there anything like that?
I know, because I had listened to so many of your podcasts, so I knew it was going to be good. I didn't have a concern. I know.
Yeah, that's good.
And there's some things where, but I knew your style. Even your website is clear. I knew it was going to be good from signing up. So yeah,
well, that's
no
good.
problems.
That's good. And I'm glad it paid off. So when you were in the course, if you were to think back and I was to say, what is the one thing that made the biggest difference? Is there anything that stands out when I ask that question?
It was the show don't tell part. And for me, the way that you taught how to do that, I was looking it up and it just wasn't clicking for me. But it was something that I was struggling with because I had so much passive voice. And then I think being a teacher, I felt like I had to explain everything, like telling, like I'm writing a syllabus or instructing. Like, here's how a fight scene works. Punch A, punch B. But when I was listening to Show Don't Tell, just the way that you presented it, it made so much more of an impact. I remember that. I don't know if I can get into the specifics because I took it like a few years ago, but I will remember that because it clicked and now I get it.
Yeah,
whereas
that's
I just
awesome.
wasn't getting it before. But that section specifically, it all was great, but that section was really helpful
Yeah.
because I felt like there was stuff in there that you don't see everywhere else.
Yeah. And for listeners who don't have that behind the scenes look at that lesson in the course, we talk about different levels of show and tell. So, yes, we show and tell on the sentence level. And, that's the common advice of the moonlight glinted on the knife or whatever. But it's also about showing how your character reacts to things, how they're processing the external events around them, and things like that. But it tends to be a favorite lesson. So, I'm glad it impacted you. And then I'm super curious now because you said your first outline that you submitted to that contest / for feedback didn't work and you got some negative feedback. You also did an outline in Notes to Novel. Do you remember if there was, I know it was so long ago, but do you remember if there was anything significant about how you did the two outlines?
The Notes to Novel outline was obviously so much better because I'm such a pantser. And so I'm like starting at the end, writing a random scene there, working backward, filling in something with the middle, and then trying to connect them,
Yeah.
which there's a lot of people do that and they're really successful. I started to learn that was making my job harder because then I ended up like working so hard on this final scene, ending up cutting it because it started over. So with the Notes to Novel outline book, that truly was, I started from point A and went to B and actually did an outline. And I got learning from you. It wasn't as attached to like, just do kind of a brief framework. I didn't have to like have that whole scene nailed down. It's just the flow. And that outline, that book started to come together much easier than the first one before I took the course.
Yeah. And I think what you said is really important because a lot of pantsers will hear the word outline and they're just kind of like, don't talk to me about that. Outlines can be anything you want. It's the goal is to help you, the writer, see the big sweep of your story. And you can take that as high level or as granular as you want. So it's just like Angela said, the goal is to not waste your time later or to not throw away things later when you can kind of work out some of that stuff in the outline. So I'm glad that worked as well. So, okay, now here's where I kind of left you and I didn't know what happened to you for a while. I saw you, got your email, saw you around the internet and things like that, but I didn't know what you were doing from leaving Notes to Novel to one day I got an email in my inbox that said, a writer you follow published a new book. And I was like, oh my gosh, she published this book. So what did you do between leaving Notes to Novel and publishing your book, which this is the book 2 of your Keepers in the Universe series called Seconds to Oblivion. So tell me about that time in between.
I was like raring to go and I really finished like that first draft came together really quickly. But then I struggled finding an editor. The person that I worked before was off the radar. I found a new editor that was rewriting things without track changes on, and which is a dangerous place to be because I really lost my voice in the book. And I remember I submitted another scene for a coaching session with you where we did an online coaching session. And that was really helpful. And it ended up completely rewriting it based on the feedback I got in that coaching scene. But what I learned to do was I only did one coaching scene with you. And I took that advice and I was able to apply it to the whole novel. So even though, again, I had to face adversity and start over and rewrite the whole thing the way I wanted, I still had those lessons in the back of my mind. So the second rewrite came together faster, found another great editor. It all just kind of came together. Had a successful book launch, sold 40 books at my book launch.
Oh, love it.
Yeah. So it was kind of up in air. There was a few times I wanted to just quit. Like you just get to this point, like I can't do this, this is so hard. And they just keep going because now seeing that it's done, that is so worth it. Everything I went through, it's so worth it.
Well, and it's so hard again, too, because like not only let's say everything goes right, it's still a marathon, right? Like it's still hard and tiring. And you get all these emotions when you're writing the book, editing the book and publishing the book and all of that. But also you did have some pretty severe hiccups, like you said, with even at the starting gate where you're like, I don't know if I want to continue. And I want to go back to what you said, because I'm sure listeners, their ears were like pinged, like, oh my God, someone was rewriting your draft. So Angela told me the other day when we were chatting that an editor, like she said, was basically rewriting pieces of her story without track changes on. So she couldn't find where her story was and where their writing was, which became a big nightmare. And you were like, again, is it worth going on? This is so hard. Right. So you had some pretty severe road bumps or roadblocks to go up across, and you still pushed through it because I think it meant so much to you to finish.
Yes. I worked so hard on it. I really believed in the story. I really wanted people to meet the new keeper, because my series is more like Avengers, where each one is like an origin story in a connected universe. And she was so different than the first keeper that I was like, I've got to get her out there. And I loved the book, and I just invested so much. You don't want to give up. If you can keep going, the way out is through. That's
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny because every time you bring up the getting the scene feedback on that one scene, I still 100% remember that whole scene because I love your story. It's a quirky space opera. It showcases women that are strong. And like you said, there's a new keeper every book. And who doesn't love like a fun little trip to Vegas in a space opera? So it's just so fun.
Yes.
But okay, so that's amazing. We're going to link to that book. Again, that is Seconds to Oblivion. It's book 2 in your Keepers of the Universe series, and that's your sci-fi series. Now, let's shift gears, and I want to hear about what made you start trying to write a romance or writing a romance, because at the time we're recording, it's actually out available for pre-order.
Yes.
What was that shift like? Because a lot of writers will ask me, like, is it weird to write in multiple genres? Is it way harder? It's enough writing one book, right? And then you're going to switch genres. What's that like?
Yeah. And I was doing that at the same time. So I was waiting for edits to come back. I've got this story in my brain that just popped up, and I'm just going to put it down. And I just started writing it. It just started coming to me. And it was so weird because I always have romantic subplots. And I'd been doing a lot of research. Romance is obviously the number one selling genre. And I was like, I love romance. I've been doing romance and watching romance and devouring romance my whole life. No, it's so different, especially coming from like a sci-fi fantasy world where you're making up magic systems, superhero systems. In sci-fi, you have to get all this theoretical, non-existent weapons and world stuff down. If you don't, even though it's fake and imaginary, it doesn't work. So the slog of really world building is intense. And I thought it was going to be easier to write the romance. However, you have to follow the rules still. There's still so much to learn about tropes and emotional wounds. And are you doing romantic comedy? And what does that look like? The hardest thing was like nailing, like, what's my lane as far as like intimate scenes? Where am I going with that? I decided, since my mother's reading it, I'm going to be lower spice, but not closed door. So, I mean, you have to do a lot of research. I started just reading romance novels and then learning from them, and then just writing these two people and realizing, you know what? I was a bridesmaid 5 times in the year 2000. Once a weekend, I had a major wedding. Like, one was in a barn, one was Greek Orthodox, one was a giant $200,000 blowout in Denver, Colorado. I have all these wedding stories. So I drew upon those, and I just started writing this romance, and now it's there.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It was the only last thing I would say, it was easier from a standpoint, like I was writing from a world that exists. It's based in Scottsdale. I lived part-time in Scottsdale. I know what the restaurants are, what the weather's like. And that was so much easier than coming up with the sci-fi fantasy world. Right. So that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so cool. And I love, like, you hit on what I love about genre fiction is that, yes, it's all fiction, but each genre is its own little world and its own little bubble. And there's rules and there's really good things that we all love about books of that genre. And then there's things that make it challenging. And you tell me if this is correct, but I would imagine that both of your genres are going to be stronger having written in 2 genres now, because it's like you just learned more tools for your toolbox.
Yes. Yes. And there's things I can apply to both, because ultimately it comes down to how strong your characters are. For me, I feel like that's what readers love because I learned a lot actually just going on and reading 1-star reviews from trad pub authors to indie authors. Not that all of them, some of them are just people who are cranky, but some are like, you can learn a lot by what readers don't like. And that taught me a lot about what to maybe avoid in the romance genre. And so, yeah, each one is its very own, but I can apply things to both now.
Yeah. And do you have an example off the top of your head of like what you might have learned from a 1-star review?
A lot of people don't, in romance specifically, the third act breakup. I'm learning that that's becoming a problem, or anything that's can be really solved by simple communication, like a misunderstanding that gets blown out of proportion leads to a breakup when all the other person had to do was maybe pick up the phone and just talk about it. Readers don't like that. And they don't like whiny love interests on either side.
Yes. It's so funny because the way, I look at things like that and I'm like, what would I imagine is the root of why they don't like it? And it's probably because it's just not done well. So like a third act breakup, when it works and it's really gut wrenching and you're just like, oh my God, how are they going to fix this? That's like you're a master of your craft when you can do something like that, like hit that key scene. You can also, of course, like do something totally different. So maybe they don't break up. Maybe they separate for whatever reason, physically or emotionally, or there's so many ways you can play with it. And I think that's what's really cool is you're doing the work to understand, like, what do people not like? What do they like? And then how do I make it me? So I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm older than, I was writing. I'm almost 50. So I'm a little more cynical as far as love goes sometimes, although I'm married to a wonderful husband. But I was so thinking back on my younger 20-something single dating life. And like, oh, no, I'm not putting this in there.
Yeah. It's a different mindset.
It is. It's totally different. I was applying at first too much logic to the romance. And that's one thing I did have to learn, that there is a fantasy piece. Like, it's not that I'm like, well, if they just talk this over, it's fine. So I guess that's not an issue. But I had to be like, don't be so logical. There is fantasy and romance.
Yeah. And different worldviews and different ways of interpreting things. And I think that's one of the key things that I see a lot of drafts that don't work. And it's like you have to build in the internal logic for who these people are in order for the overall logic to make sense with that mix of fantasy and that hope that we're going to get the HEA and all that stuff. So it's like if you do the work, like you said, the character work, if you understand like why certain conventions and key scenes or tropes could play into this, and you understand that deeper why, I think it's like you just have so many things to work with. And so much to play with, so much you can make unique to your story. But yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yes. Yeah, it was really fun. And I actually have 3 more romances outlined because I'm going to make them duologies. That's another thing I learned that a lot of people are doing, like taking one character from and carrying that person over to being a love interest where they were kind of a side character. So that's the new challenge. And I've heard that readers really are liking duologies. So it's not like investing in an entire series, but just having those 2 where you get a little bit more of that world, but you're not like, okay, there's 6 books in this,
Well, it's so fun too, because usually in the second book, the couple from the first book will make a little cameo and you get those feelings still of like, everything's good for them. So that's so cool. And so this book is called My Plus One Equals You, and we will link to that in the show notes as well. So I want to also ask you why you decided to self-publish, because you have self-published the Keepers of the Universe series and My Plus One Equals You.
Yes. And I was on the fence about My Plus One Equals You because a few people reading it said you should try to pitch this because it's good. And I'm saying they read the better draft. So, okay, they didn't read the awful first draft. But I just decided there's pros and cons with each. And I think trad publishing, if you can get a deal, it's fantastic and there's rewards. But the more research I did, for me, I think the road to trad publishing is the long game. It doesn't happen instantly, even if you get an agent and then your book goes back to editing, maybe back to cover design. It takes a little bit of the control out from you. And there's just no guarantees. Where for me, I was so excited about my romance and my keepers books that I just wanted to do it my way and get it out there. It is more tiring doing marketing and things like that, but I wanted to, it is back to trusting myself in that. I feel strongly about the covers. I had really good people working on them. Book Brush and Yummy covers. They're great to work with. And I wanted to do it my way and get it out there. So not waiting for possibly years, you get rejected. Maybe you get something, maybe you don't. And then that's time ticking where my story could be out there.
Right.
So that was the biggest part of that decision.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right, because not only does it take a long time, but then it's like I've seen some people get close to the finish line and something bad happens and it all falls apart.
Yeah.
So you just really never know, and it takes so long. But now being on the opposite, like the other side of the fence, do you have any regrets about choosing that route?
No, I think the only regret I have is I'd like to try pitching once. I'd just like to try it. I want to have that experience. I want to know what it's like to actually try to find an agent, query, pitch. That's another skill. And so I may do it down the road just because at the point I have a romance that I could do it with. I have nothing to lose. If it doesn't happen, I can self-publish. But I think maybe just not getting that chance to try it and see. And I don't know.
Plus, you're such a learner. Like, you probably just want the experience too. You know?
Do. I like to have all experience. I'm a sponge. I just want to absorb everything. So maybe someday.
The good news that I know about you is you're doing a lot to build your audience already. So not only do you have free books out, but you're starting a podcast, and you're doing, you're coming on podcasts. You're doing a lot of things to build your readership. And that's going to be appealing for the day when you ever happen to query agents. So all good things, but you'll have to keep me posted if you have any big learnings that way, or if any successes that way. We'll have to have you back and hear about some of that.
I definitely will. Definitely.
So, Angela, I'm going to take you back to that day that you pulled out the manuscript and you were like, this is something I want to do. If you could tell yourself anything back then, what would you say?
I would say trust yourself. And I had to really go through this because I went through I had compare-itis. I had, my book is never going to be good enough-itis. And I gave away a lot of like my power in my storytelling because I was feeling so insecure that I wasn't good enough. You are good enough. And people are waiting for your story. And I needed to like trust myself more so that I wouldn't have gone down all these routes, like saying, oh, I need this help and I need to sign up for this and I need to follow this person's advice and I think I should do this, but this person's telling me different. I guess they're the expert. I'll go with them. And a lot of times that works. Trusting you, that worked beautifully. But when you do it too much and not say, you know what, I really feel strongly that this should be in my story.
Yeah.
And trust yourself. That's where you can avoid a lot of heartache because you're not going to give your voice away so much. You need to be open to feedback. You need to be willing to kill your darlings, even though you're in love with them. If 3 alpha readers are saying this doesn't work, you got to let it go. But trust yourself more than you think you do. And that's what I would have told my previous self.
That. And it makes so much sense based on everything you've been through. And something that I do I have a business world where I'm running my business, and then I have my writing world where I have mentors on each side, and there's people I look to for things on each side. And what I do, because I can really fall into overwhelm quick, and I can get, like you said, all the voices in my head of I should do this, but I feel like I should do that. And there's so many opinions on things, right? And what I've seen on both sides of the fence is that everyone's advice is basically trying to get you to the same point. So instead of if we take plotting methods, for example, it's the perfect example. There's Save the Cat, there's Snowflake method, there's Story Grid, there's 3-act structure, there's all these different things, and Hero's Journey. We're never going to have our story like check off each box perfectly because it's each person's interpretation of like, this is how you write a story. However, they're all trying to get you to the same spot. So it's like whatever one resonates with you, go with that. I always say I'm limited to 3 mentors that I'm going to really stick to their advice. One of those mentors is me. So like I get a seat at the table too. So me, and then I'm going to pick 2 other people that's like, all right, if I lost everyone else, these are the people that make sense. And so for anyone, I feel like someone out there listening needed to hear something like that.
Yeah.
So you're hearing it from me and Angela, like blinders and also trust your gut.
Yes. Trust your gut. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that so much. Okay. Well, Angela, is there anything else you would love to impart on listeners before I let you go?
No, maybe just you can't see too far down the road, right? And being a self-published author, it's full of potholes. That road is full of potholes. But I never thought I'd be sitting here on Savannah Gilbo's podcast. I mean, you're my idol, honestly. And I was a listener, listening in my car with nothing. And now I have 3 books out due to your guidance. Like, I seriously acknowledge you in every novel because it meant so much to me to have you as that guide and to be in your class, to be on that coaching session. You just never know where those connections are going to take you. So it'll happen. Just be patient and you'll get there.
Yeah. Listeners won't be able to see me, but I've got some tears in my eyes because that means so much to me. Thank you for that, Angela. We're going to link to all where we can find you on the internet, your books and all that good stuff in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing everything with listeners. I know they're going to love this episode.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So that's it for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and for showing your support. If you want to check out any of the links I mentioned in this episode, you can find them in the show notes listed in the description of each episode inside your podcast player or at savannahgilbo.com/podcast. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast that's worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help this podcast get in front of more fiction writers just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button because there's going to be another brand new episode next week full of actionable tips, tools, and strategies to help you become a better writer. So I'll see you next week, and until then, happy writing.